All right, welcome back to We Are the Fall. I'm Gavin,
And I'm Steve.
and for this month's interrogation, we have the fine pleasure of chatting with the one and only Mr. Steve Pringle. And Mr. Steve Pringle is going to be someone that any fall head that's delved a little bit further than your average fall head into the back catalog and trying to search for further into kind of some written work about the context and the themes of the fall and what was going on in different periods. They have come across his very large and very well regarded, and I'd say comprehensive book. You must get them all on record. And it was such a fun chat with Steve, and I think everyone's going to enjoy it. He went on the journey similar to us, Steve, a little bit different, but I think we're very much like-minded in the way that we approach the Falls music and very I appreciate his even keeled nature and his level-headedness in being critical at times about the fall when it needs to be critical in in a fair way, but then also writing about it in such an engaging way that it's something that I'm always going to come back to his work, his written word, and he's done so many projects that we're going to link to.
Yeah, I love the interview. Unfortunately, I had to sit out while you really dug in and got out the dirty details from him during your interrogation.
You're on your deathbed.
I was on my deathbed. I have twins at home. He has twins at home. He understood that those little gremlins get you sick all the time.
Yeah.
I liked hearing kind of how he came into like you said, similar path. Like he came into the fall. He was trying to listen to songs, like almost
Hmm.
individual songs. And, I think he got through them all and he realized that there's more to it. I need to think about it a different way if I'm gonna approach it in this book. And
Have another go.
have another go through the records. He found our path one at a time, really dive deep on one record at a time, and then you finally understand you truly must get them all.
Yeah, he was a great guest. He's a great talk, great chat, and he's got a new podcast that he shouts out at the end of this, but we'll also shout it out, which is Steve's Mixtapes. And he's done a bunch of, he's got the Fallen Fives radio show, which I've been digging into that archive and really enjoying myself. But I'm also going to be on his podcast, the Steve's Mixtapes. So I look forward to that. And you can go to stevesmixtapes.com and enjoy that as well as a bunch of other deep dives that Steve's done into the Guided by Voices discography and a bunch of other things. So, without further ado, enjoy our interrogation with Mr. Steve Pringle.
Hi.
Hey, Steve, how's it going?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, you can hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect, perfect. Yeah, so I was wondering if you also had a chance to take a look at that 30 minutes on a slag heap.
I haven't had a chance, I'm
It's
afraid.
all right.
Sorry. I
No, no,
travelled down to
no.
Cardiff and then work's been a bit mad, and it's been a busy time of the year. So
No,
I've got it bookmarked, and I will watch it. But yeah, it looks interesting. I'm sure I haven't. I watched the first sort of couple of minutes, and I definitely haven't seen it before. Where
yeah,
did you
no,
unearth that from?
yeah, well, Steve actually got it for me for a Christmas gift, and I had a really great time watching it, and I think you're gonna enjoy it. It's like Mark at his most combative, but also his most cynical about Manchester and the Manchester music scene. And I believe it's from, there's no date on it, but it's got to be like mid 90s, and they're
Well,
just
funnily enough, I
yeah.
just put on as we were waiting. I thought I'll put one of your podcasts on. I was just listening to the first side of Shift Work. So you've literally just been
Okay.
talking about in my ears. You've literally just been talking about Idiot Joy Showland, which is about obviously exactly that. So
Yeah. It's so funny because you got Mark standing in front of a rubble pile, but
yeah,
the camera crew and the interviewer, he's obviously just have like trying to amuse himself, but they have it so such a close up on his face because I'm just guessing they were trying to get usable footage that didn't have the rubbish pile behind them, right? Behind him. And he keeps on telling the camera guy, why don't you get an angle from over there? Because he wanted it. He knew it would look like cool and like something that you wouldn't see in an interview.
Yeah. I mean, the close up would be fine because that's just towards the end of the period where he was a genuinely handsome man. Because I mean,
Yeah.
you look at him in the early '80s, he was really, and even my wife sometimes sees pictures and is quite surprised. Actually, he was quite good looking, wasn't he? I said, yeah, he was. But
Yeah.
we're just at the tail end of that because it's, I think, mid early-ish '90s when the drink starts to have its effect and all the other substances and all the rest of it, and it goes a bit decline. He was always a striking looking fella, but he was never quite as handsome after the sort of the early '90s onwards.
That's right. That's no, I totally agree. And he was always a unique looking, the his facial features, right? But then as he got, more into the substances or it continued to show its wear on him, it just became more and more like a gout look.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I would say the older Smith, his face certainly had character, is how you might
Yes.
say it.
No, that's right.
You
That's
could you
right.
could always tell he'd lived a life.
That's right. But Steve, thanks for joining us because your book has been congrats on the book. I know it's been out for a while now, but it's been such a great resource for us as fall heads getting into it and then continuing into it. And I got to tell you, I think I bought around four, maybe five copies of the book so this will be your appearance fee and
Oh, okay.
other, but I've given them to fall heads who have obviously enjoyed them, but then I've also given them to non-fall heads and that people that have no idea about the fall
Okay.
that I think will like it. And once
Yeah.
they get past the fact that I've given them a tome of a of a book of a band that they've never heard of, they have told me that they really have enjoyed the context you add to all of the albums, and it's really kind of allows them to even jump in at random points and get the gist of like where they're at in the career. So
Well, one of my aims was that you could read, even if you didn't know the Fool's music, that certainly the first half of each chapter, so the story, the narrative bit, is you could read that because it's a good story. The Fall.
yes,
It's a fascinating story with lots of twists and turns. And even if you skip the song by song bit, you'd still find an enjoyable story. I hope that's quite a generous gift on your part, really, because with the shipping to the US is horrendous these days, isn't it? It's almost the
yeah,
same
no,
price as the
no,
book.
no, it's wild, and this is not just for books too. This is for like we're trying to find these albums that are kind of the side albums of like the band
Okay.
members doing their side project. They're doing the real projects right outside of the fall, and we were trying to find some albums and get them over here, and it's just a pain in the ass to be honest.
I mean, one or two people were quite aggrieved that they would either direct at me or at the publisher and say, "Why are you charging so much?" And it's really nothing to do. It's certainly nothing to do with me, but it's nothing to do with root publishing either.
Yeah,
It's just in the last few years, the
yeah.
cost of shipping to the US has just skyrocketed, and there's nothing we can do about it. And it's a heavy book as well. So
No, that's right. Yeah, but can you talk to us a little bit more about you obviously did the Fallen Fives, your blog, when you started out,
yeah, yeah.
and then you moved into writing the book. Well, you started to do
Well,
the
would you
chronological.
like me to start from the beginning?
Yeah, take me back
because
to the beginning,
I
please.
know I'm into I've listened to a few of your podcasts, and you do like to do things in detail. I'm quite impressed with the fact you get an hour and a half out of one side of an album, which is quite
Us
impressive.
too.
So I'll take you back to the beginning. If you want to edit any of it out later,
Oh,
obviously.
I love it.
Um,
Yes, please.
so yeah, so I don't have a typical sort of full trajectory, if you like, because what you find is if you look at stuff online, people will often say, "Oh, I had this moment where there's one or two things." They say, "I heard them play such and such," normally on John Peel, and they say,
Mhm.
"Oh, I heard Container Drivers," or "I heard this, and I was blown away, and my world was never the same again." The other type of person that's common is they'd hear a few songs and think, "What is that terrible racket? I can't get into this." But then there'd be a song where it suddenly clicked for them, and they got into it from then. So I'm slightly different in a sense that I mean I'm getting old now and my memory is fading, but I must have heard because I listened to John Peel in the early '80s. So I started secondary school, as we would call it. So that's where you go when you're 11. So I guess it's similar to middle school, high
Right.
school. Um, but the first time I really properly listened to The Fall, I happen to know, was in 1984 when I was 15. And a girl that I knew who was dating an older guy, a student, who had this apparently really exciting record collection. He made her loads of tapes. Anyway, she passed this tape on to me at school. She said, whatever his name was, gave me this. I don't like it, it's too weird, but you might like it. And it was The Wonderful and Frightening World. And I put it on, and Lay of the Land came on, and I had one of those, wow, I've never heard anything like it. Because I mean, that begins, with that weird, the chanting and everything, and then it clatters along, doesn't it? I thought, I've never heard anything like this. So I loved it, and I played it to death. And in fact, I often tell this story. I can't remember what the other album was on the other side of the C90. But what I actually did, because I had a double cassette deck in those days, I recorded Wonderful and Frightening World onto another cassette, then back onto the other side. So I just used to loop it round and round and round and round. So yeah. And then the year after This Nation Saving Grace came out, and I bought that on vinyl. I remember playing I Am Damo Suzuki and thinking there was something wrong with my record player, because you think, nobody could have meant to make that sort of stuff. So went on from there. And then left university, did my teacher training, and started teaching in the early 90s. I also got married, started a family. And also, it's interesting you talk about shift work, because shift work, Code Selfish, was, I've come to appreciate it now, but at the time I wasn't really into it. It sounded too much like other things, didn't have enough guitars on it for me. And that, on top of the demands of having a young family, starting my career, and music just wasn't as accessible in those days. Of course, there's no Spotify, no internet. You had to rely on what you found in record shops and all the rest of it. And I just sort of lost touch. And then if you zoom forward quite a few years, I read the Dave Simpson article, the one, Weren't You in the Fall? And then my wife bought me, this is my second wife, sorry, I say that like there's going to be a series of them. My wife bought me the Dave Simpson book, which I read, and I was reading through it, and I was reading about albums like Cerebral Caustic and stuff like that, and Levitator, thinking, some of these albums, not only do I not own or have listened to, I haven't heard of some of these albums, because I was completely lost touch. So I went through the process of going back and acquiring all of these albums, which was, as you will know, even in this country, sometimes can be quite challenging. I mean, Levitate was out of print completely for a long time, quite hard to get a hold of. And became really enthused at what I was doing. I joined the Fall Online forum. And I'd really was looking for a writing project. I've always loved writing. So I started thinking about, well, how could I write about the Fall? I don't want to just do it chronologically. That would be a bit boring. I'm sure it's been done before. And we have this thing in the UK. It's like a government health thing that they encourage people to eat their 5 a day. So you should eat 5 portions of fruit and vegetables a day. And so we get a lot of food things have advertised at 1 of your 5 a day. You see that this sort of thing. And I remember seeing an advert, and I was trying to think of a title and angle to write about the Fall. And the advert said some 5 a day, and I thought, Fall 5 a day. And so my original plan, which was a bit mad, was to write about 5 Fall songs every day. And I soon realized that
like a 5 a day eat yourself fitter.
Yes, something like that, yeah. But then I thought, well, so I did a bit of research and tried to narrow down how many songs there are, and I think there's 525. You could argue the toss,
sure,
about whether there are some things that they only play live once or changed names. Was it But I settled on 525. So the fact that it was divisible by 5, and I had this 5 a day idea, I soon knocked it on the head, because doing 105 days in a row, writing about 5 different Fall songs, so I thought that's not really going to be sustainable, doing it that way. But the idea of the 5 stuck. So I stuck it in a random list generator, came up with these little 5-song playlists, and I drive a lot as part of my job. So if I was driving off for work and I had a 2-3 hour drive, I'd stick it on and just listen to those 5 songs on a loop. And then in the evening, when I'd finish my work, I'd sit down and write down what I thought about those 5 songs. And it just sort of took momentum from there. And it started off as a little personal project, and then the numbers grew. And then the last post, I think I had something like 1,500 people read it, and a few people said, you should think about making all of this into a book. But I didn't. I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll go back and I will do it chronologically. So that was the website, You Must Get Them All. And I had lots of invaluable help from people. But as I went through and I bought all the Fall books that there were, the most comprehensive one was Simon Ford's one. I don't know if you've seen that. That's quite hard to get hold of, the Hip Priest one.
Yeah, we haven't got that one yet.
Yeah, I had to pay something ridiculous, like 40 quid or something, to get it. It's not easy to get a hold of. But that stops in 2001. So it's pretty much literally half the band's career. And I thought, well, there's a gap here. So I went to Root, who obviously published Steve's book, Paul's book, Si's book.
Did you have a different experience listening to it in the fall. The Fallen Fives is such interesting because you're like you could get a side by side of two drastically different as you did songs together, and then you did them in chronological order by album. Did you get a different listening
Yeah,
um, experience?
absolutely. Because
Yeah,
there are always some songs that make a lot more sense in context.
right.
Um, and particularly some of the little, the short ones like Live at the Witch Trials, for example, some of those little um, sort of experimental pieces, if you like. Sometimes they sit quite nicely in context.
Yeah,
But something like Live at the Witch Trials itself, the song Live at the Witch Trials, if you're listening to it on a looped playlist, it can actually get a little bit tiresome. You know
sure.
what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was different. I mean, the process is also very different. I hadn't quite realized how, I suppose I just got used to the blog writing side. Um, because you write in a completely different way for a blog, because you have hyperlinks, it's going with the pictures. You are also always working on the premise that somebody might be reading this who perhaps didn't read the last one or the one before. So if you try to stick it all together, what you get is you have to rewrite the bits that have hyperlinks in to make a point. But also it was quite repetitious
Mhm.
because there was too much overlap and so on. And I have to say, Ian, as an editor, did a brilliant job of helping me chop it down. There were actually 4 drafts before we actually got it all nice and tidied
So it
up.
was even longer. It was even more
Yeah, well,
comprehensive.
the other thing I did is I went a bit mad on footnotes. I'm a big fan of footnotes in books.
Sure.
Do you know the comedian Stuart Lee?
Yeah, I did.
He's a
Yeah.
huge Fall fan, obviously.
Yeah.
He's done a couple of books that are sort of annotated versions of his stand-up routines, but he
Mhm.
writes so many footnotes that sometimes you get about 6 lines of text and all the rest of the page is footnotes.
Sure.
I quite like that stuff. Paul Hanley does it really well in his Hex book. The footnotes in
Absolutely.
there are
It is
brilliant,
great.
absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think. I've actually got the book here. I'm trying to think how many I had in the end. 400 and something. Yeah,
That
433, I
sounds
think
right.
I had. The original draft I sent to Ian had well over 1,000 footnotes in it.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
said, you've got to cut some of those out. That'll drive people mad.
Well, I got to ask you this. Was there any, looking back, was there any particular album or maybe some of the content that you had a challenge writing about?
Um, Not specific songs. What is a challenge somewhere is there are some adjectives and phrases that go naturally with certain periods of the fall.
Mhm,
So when
mhm.
you're writing about the early 80s, it's quite difficult to avoid things like rickety and ramshackle, when there was
Yeah.
sort of songs that fell on the verge of falling apart. Um, and the other thing that I had to work on was particularly sort of the last 10 albums, finding ways of saying there's some interesting words here, but nobody has any idea what they mean.
That's the
Do you know what I mean?
hardest part,
You
right?
look at stuff, the stuff that's on like
Yeah.
Ersatz GB, and you look at it, you think that's really interesting wordplay. I have no idea what it might mean. Um, you know,
I gotta
uh,
say though, you do a great job too. I mean, in contrast to that, Steve and I have found that even going through when we're like only midway through the 90s, that using, like you're saying, the same adjectives, the same descriptors for the music too is kind of hard to get around
yeah,
sometimes when the cliche always comes up, the always, always different, always the same. It's kind of true, but then at the same time, you want to give it its due. Like, for example, I was reading yesterday about one of your lines. You compared Steve. You basically said that Steve Hanley's bass sounded flatulent, and it was perfect, and it was in a positive way. But I
yeah.
knew exactly what you were getting at, which like there was this low rumble, but it also has this fuzziness to it, and it's like the perfect descriptor. Do you have any background in music, or do you?
No, no, I don't. And it's just interesting you say that.
Yeah,
I was really determined. To me, a lot of music writing, a lot of music books is let down by the fact that it focuses too much on the lyrics. Now,
right.
obviously, you're going to write about lyrics if you're writing about the fall. Smith's lyrics are an intrinsic part of it. But too many, and not just about the fall, too many music books, because it's easier, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
most music writers, I say, don't really have a technical background. I don't have a technical background in music. I mean, I can play the guitar a little bit.
Mhm.
I know what a chord progression is. I know what a key change is and all those bits. I know what an arpeggio is and all that sort of stuff. But I don't have the actual background. But I was really determined with every song to say something about the words and something about the music. And there's one of the regular contributors on the Fall Online forum who is actually a college lecturer in music, and he has all the technical knowledge, and he gets really frustrated by the fact he reads so much and it's all lyrics, 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 and they don't write about what the music sounds like.
Yeah.
And you can do it. I'm not really a believer in Mr. Zappa's motto about was it dancing about architecture and all the rest of it.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's a nonsense. That's like saying you can't write about painting, or you can't write about films. It's a nonsense, really. So yeah, and he will say that my rudimentary technical musical knowledge comes across, but I do at least try to say what they sound like. But it is a challenge. One of the format of it was partly inspired by a book about the Smiths called "The Song That Saved My Life." Is it called? It's the same sort of format, not exactly the same. It doesn't have a separate chronology. What it does, it's track by track in the order that it was first composed, and it tells the story through the summary of each song. There's a guy who's done something similar with David Bowie. I can't remember his name now. The second volume is called Ashes to Ashes, and I can't remember what the first one was. Rebel Rebel was the first one. Can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head. And he's done the same thing. He basically goes through all of the songs in the order they were first recorded, something like that. That's quite hard to do, to tell the story through that. I've taken the easy way out, which is story songs, story songs.
No, I like the structure a lot, and even I also appreciate you provide how often it was played live because that adds a lot of context too. Because you assume a lot of the times when they had a song that you find maybe even personally interesting or personally connects with you, that sometimes they played it once or maybe twice or maybe never live. And
Yeah, yeah.
how does you like why did that happen? And it's always the fun kind of conjecture to
Yeah. The only
guess.
thing I would say about that, and I do mention this at the beginning of the book, I think that this will go out of date. A lot of those numbers are wrong, and now we improve on because people keep unearthing recordings of gigs that we weren't sure they existed. I mean, the first chapter is wrong because we've discovered that there were more earlier gigs than we suspected. There were more gigs in 1977.
We'll just say
Um,
they're underestimated numbers. It's
yeah,
just okay. It's
but they do give you a rough picture, and
they do.
it's certainly right in terms of we look at how often Mr. Pharmacist was played.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some songs were played a lot, like Mr. Pharmacist, like "And They're In" gets
Yep.
more plays than you'd expect, and I think it's because of the turnover of new members. Songs that were pretty easy to learn. I mean, "And They're In" is quite an easy little chug to learn on the guitar, isn't it?
Or you
Mr.
throw it in the
Pharmacist is a
set.
pretty standard psych pop blues progression, isn't it? So yeah, I think that's where some of them come out. But there's other fascinating things in there. There's somebody's just started a thread on the Fall Online forum about Backdrop and how it was
Mm,
never properly recorded, and why would such a good song never be properly recorded? Who would ever
right. It
know?
only came out on that compilation, right? Which is
Yeah.
the questionable, yeah, choice. It's all just fun to speculate about too. And I'm also wondering, Steve, you have a family and you went through this. I mean, we're going through it right now, and it's my co-host Steve and I, and he's trying to figure out what kind of fall songs are working for a 3 to 6 year old audience. And yeah, I'm just wondering if you have any, and you dedicate your book to, I assume your wife is on the
Yes.
dedication page. I'm wondering if you have any kind of, can tell us about the journey in relation to having a family.
Well, so as far as my wife goes, Kirsty, in fact, she did. I did a series of well, they were called podcasts, a really radio show, the Falling Fives radio show that I did.
Yeah, yeah.
She actually appeared on one, and I played her 5 songs, and she gave her opinion. I mean, uh, we always jokingly, it's referred to in there that she always describes it as the worst band in the world. She has never understood what I say in it. But so that's one of the reasons it's dedicated to her, because she put up with me
Mhm.
having the fall on all of the time.
That's fair.
Um, as for the kids, well, I have a set of older kids from my first marriage, and obviously I have the twins. It's a bit early. We're still at the sort of baby shark and nursery rhyme stage with them.
Mhm.
The older ones range between ambivalent to can't stand them, I'm afraid.
Mm,
My eldest is a complete metalhead,
okay,
and is an expert in all the bewildering subgenres of metal that you get.
that's cool.
Um, but the youngest of the older crew, if you see what I mean. So there's one who's now 17 and a daughter who's 20. They actively say when it comes on, "Why would you listen to this? It's bad." Or my daughter once memorably said when the Fall were on, "Was he always drunk?"
Yeah, good question. I mean,
because he does sometimes sound like that, doesn't he?
yeah, even when he's not, when he's definitely not, you can just be like,
Well,
oh, it's the
yeah,
enunciation. It's kind of
yeah.
fun.
There's some. I mean, you listen to him, the Peel version of New Puritan. He's not drunk on that because that's the way that the lyrics come out. But then
Yeah.
I quite like some of the just got back from the pub songs. Like, do you know Bert Whistle's "Girl in Shop"? Oh,
No,
it's a
not
marvelous,
yet.
marvelous random B-side. It's clearly the band of Program been messing around with something in the afternoon. Smith's come back from an afternoon in the pub, has
Mm.
scribbled a few words on the back of a beer mat, and just yells them over the top of the music, totally disconnected. And I really like it. So yeah, well, after we finish, you go off and listen to Bert Whistle's "Girl in Shop."
I
I think
will
it's
for sure.
wonderful.
Right after this.
Well, it's a song. If you wanted to put somebody off the floor, somebody has generally, fairly mainstream taste, and you want to play them something that will convince them never to listen to the Fall again, then you either play them that or Ibis Afro Man, one of the two.
Well, honestly, Steve, I assume if they're listening to you and me, I think that they maybe have an open enough
Oh yeah,
mind.
yeah, yeah. Not on here. Yeah, no, I'm sure
Yeah,
people
yeah,
would not
yeah.
on here.
No, no, but I'm also wondering, Steve, did you come across any sources and notes, any sources that were unique or interesting to yourself or you thought were cool?
No, I don't think so. Well, it's more a form of collation because various people who've run, like the full website,
Hmm.
the guy who does BuzzFidget, I always pronounce it, who did the annotated fall, which sadly
Yeah,
seems to have disappeared
yeah.
at the
I heard
moment.
Dan is working on it though,
He's
right?
working on a
Yeah,
replacement, yes, slowly but surely, and you can
good.
rest assured that'll be factually correct.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Knowing Dan. So yeah, it was pulling those together. I mean, there were pages and pages and pages of stuff. Every time there's a gig, people were coming on and saying, "Oh, they played this," or "They went off after how many minutes," or put some photos up. So it was really just a lot of trawling through the internet and looking through these. And of course, you get contradictions because one person will say, "Oh, they started with Sparta FC," and somebody else will say, "No, they finished with Sparta FC." And going through all those is really difficult. Um,
Even Mark contradicting himself, right? You
yeah.
get
Oh
so
yeah.
many
Yeah.
instances
Yeah,
of that.
yeah.
Yeah.
But there's lots of interviews and so on there, and a lot of people have done a lot of very hard work in collating things before me. And it was just pulling things together, and the annotated for was invaluable for the way it sent and discovered these potential links. Because a lot of Smith's writing was about things he'd been inspired in, just an advert in a newspaper,
Right.
a subtitle in a book, and a line in a film, and the way that people have come together to put all that together. Quite a lot of it's still conjecture, obviously, but then you have somebody like Dan who research it and say, well, I've worked out he must have written this in February 1984, and that film was repeated in January 1984 on ITV. So I think he probably was inspired by it. I don't have the research skills or the patience to do what Dan does. I mean, he's a librarian by trade. So
Yes. No, he's unbelievable. He's
oh yeah, yeah.
unbelievable.
When people say to me, because you're the fall expert, I said no. Dan is the fall expert. I'm the fall writer.
Yeah.
He's the proper expert.
No, we're always referring to the annotated fall in Dan's work because it is just so you would never get to that point, even if you had, an exuberant amount of free time to get there. Yeah, I don't think you would get there without the skill set that he, has and utilizes.
Well,
Um,
obviously, his crowning achievement was finding the bit from Dr. Buck's letter
right.
that was in a free magazine that a train company was giving out. And I don't think anybody else in the world would have found that other than
I
Dan.
doubt it. I really doubt it. Steve, can you tell me about the first time you saw the fall live?
Yeah, well, I'm not actually a huge gig goer for a
Yeah.
number of reasons. It's partly because where I've lived, apart from a year that I did my teacher training in Manchester, apart from that, I've tended to live in out of the way places where gig going is difficult. Where I
Mhm.
live now, you have to go an hour and a half for a gig in Manchester, or an hour a bit more than that to Birmingham. So I'm not blessed with gig going. There are some bands I've seen, but for a variety of reasons, no, I didn't really get to see the Fall much. And the first time I saw the Fall was the Reading Festival in 1990,
Oh, oh, okay.
which there is a video of
Yeah.
on there. But no, no, it's I'm not. That's not the stuff I've written about from gigs. I'm really lucky is that so many people have written about the experience. Obviously, internet. From the internet age onwards, it gets a lot easier because there's so many people writing about those experiences, which is really good. Um, but yeah, it's a lot more difficult before that.
I got a question for you specifically because you've gone through the process of listening through the whole catalog multiple times, upon multiple times.
Mm.
And I just want to get your perspective of why do you believe that this music, this catalog is so re-listenable? I mean, even coming from a band that's so self-proclaimed to
Yeah.
be repetitive, why is it this way?
Well, I think there's a number of factors. I mean, for a start, it's a very diverse
Hmm.
catalogue, but at the same time, it is a bit of a cop out in a way. This response, but it's an honest one. There's you can play any Fall record pretty much, I think, from the 70s right up to the end. And even if you don't hear any of Smith's vocals, which are obviously the most distinguishable features, there's something Fall-like, or there is a Fall sound that runs through it. And that's true even if you're talking about Live at the Witch Trials. It's true if you're talking about the Dave Bush era that I know you've been looking at recently. It's true of all the, Pete Greenaway and the sort of garage punky later stuff. There's something very undefinably Fall about it. And that's one of the wonderful things about it. I think another thing about it is the diversity of the back catalogue makes the Fall great for making compilations. So I had a bit of fun for a while when I haven't done one for ages, but I did a series of Fall in Five's blogs with a sort of Spotify playlist on a theme. So songs about Christmas, songs about drugs, songs about books, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. And they lend themselves very well to a carefully selected compilation because of the variety. But at the other hand, all of the albums pretty much work as coherent bodies of work. So there's great value to be had from listening to them all the way through. In fact, on the way down to Cardiff yesterday, I listened to New Facts Emerge start to finish, which I know is not to everybody's taste, but I love New Facts Emerge.
Yeah.
It's such a great swan song. And he sounds so on his game, even though he's obviously starting to fade a little bit. And there's such joy and humor in his voice. It's great. So I think there's those two aspects as well. And there's also there's something very northern. It's going to sound very cliched, very northern and working class. And I don't know how well this translates outside the UK, but before the Fall, there were northern bands, but there weren't bands whose songs were about the North. So you look at stuff like "Lie Dream of a Casino Soul," right? No band that lived in London or the Southwest could have written that song. That's about Northern life. The North will rise again and stuff like that. And there's a pride to that northerness, and I think that connected with a lot of people. And then there's also the sort of the working class aspect of it, not about inverse snobbery or anything like that, but about working class culture and tradition. And there's nothing Smith hated more than anything he considered to be pretentious. There was nothing more. The number of times he declaimed about the horrors of the middle class and all the rest of it. So that also gives it a uniqueness, I think. So there's lots of different things. Lots of different things.
No, this is something I'm interested in as well, because the working class aspect is always something we like to talk about on the show. But also, I was talking recently to someone about kind of like Beatles fans and Fall fans, and obviously there's overlap. But we were talking, and then we got to the point where we're thinking online message boards in the Beatles community that's all about the gear they used, the instruments and the things like that, and you almost never come across that in the Fall fandom. And I think it really comes down to this working class kind of nature, but also because the people in the band were such the forefront, like going back to Steve Hanley, there's no one that could play like Steve Hanley, even if they have the exact fuzz pedal, the chorus,
there's a hilarious interview that he does, and I can't remember where the venue is. It's at a festival or something like that, and he does a public interview, with an audience there, with a music journalist who I think is from Mojo magazine. And he says at some point to me, he says, "Go ask me a proper Mojo question, like what strings did we use?"
Yeah.
And it was the way he says it is hilarious. The only thing in all of the Fall books really I can think about where they actually talked about the gear or the equipment is Paul Hanley talking about the fact that people used to think that on Dragnet and that sort of era, the outer tune guitars were some sort of musical statement.
Right.
And he says, "Well, I'll just point out that once we were introduced to digital guitar tuners or electric, pedal guitar tuners, we didn't sound like that anymore."
Yeah.
That's about the only real reference I can think of.
Another
Yeah,
change of the sound. I know we talk about Briggs loved her guitars, so like her guitars were also the fashionable thing. Even when she writes in her book, it's all about the fashion, the look of the guitar, and the rest of the band. If Mark said we're going to take you to the shop to get a new instrument, it was usually to make up for something that had
yeah,
happened in the band, right?
yeah.
Like,
And
yeah,
and the other working class aspect of it is, yes, I mean he could be, terror. He could be appalling to some band members, and there are some shocking stories out there. But he also clearly felt quite responsible for them, particularly the last lineup, and his whole notion of sticking to the album and tour a year, which in recent years has become completely outmoded, hasn't it? This idea that you do an album and a couple of singles every year. Um, but it was all about seeing the Fall as a business. That's not to denigrate the music side of things, but he was a working man. The Fall was his job. He had to
Mhm.
make sure that he had a wage and the guys in the band were paid. And I think that working class ethic comes across in that just as much as the music.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's quite important as well.
Yeah, and to go back to your point of like the re-listenability of it is to me it comes down to that, which was even at their most quote unquote polished, it was a very immediate sound. They went in the studio and they put down those songs. They didn't tend to overthink it too much. They didn't tend to overdub too much, and that's why I feel like it's immediate and it makes it easy to re-listen because it has that edge to it that it
Hmm.
doesn't sound like it's overthought. It doesn't sound like it's delivered in a neat package for you, you know?
And to go back to that, it's that Fall sound that runs through all. I can't really think of another artist where there isn't anybody that sounds like the Fall.
Hmm.
Now, people are often, you read articles, people say, "Oh, you'll like such and such." They sound a lot like a modern day version of the Fall. I listen to them and I think, no, they don't. People talk about Pavement a lot. Now, I think there are bits of Slanted and Enchanted that showed that Pavement had been listening to the Fall, but I
Yeah.
still don't think they sounded like the Fall. In fact, I can't really, and I struggle
Yeah.
to think of another artist where you'd say definitively nobody else sounds like them. And you could argue the toss about that, I suppose, but I think that's another one of the attractions, really.
Steve, has your relationship with the fall changed at all doing the multiple
Um,
listens through?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I guess it's all those qualities you've just been talking about. It's a mark of them that, despite the fact that when writing some of these chapters and writing some of these blog posts, I listen to the albums over and over and over again. I mean, I've had periods of a break.
Mhm.
I've had periods where I haven't listened to the Fall for 2-3 weeks, maybe because I've gone to other things. I'm always like, I've always liked listening to new music, new as in contemporary, also new, finding a band whose back catalogue I've not found. I'm currently doing a blog on Guided by Voices,
Love
um,
it. Yeah.
who I never quite, they clicked for me
Yeah.
towards the end of 2023. Um, and I won't talk about it now because I've talked about this sort of thing enough already. But if you look me up online, you'll see that there's a blog about it, and I talk about how it clicked. So I'm making my way through the albums. I'm almost exactly halfway through because of course they have
Excellent.
even more. I'm just starting on English Little League, which is number 20, I think, but they're just about to release number 41.
Yeah.
By the time I finish, they'll probably be on number 47, the rate that he goes.
Are you doing
Um,
all the just the guided by
no,
voices? Are you doing the
I'm
Robert
just, no, no, no,
Pollard?
no, no,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
I'm
I was
not
about to
risking
save
any of
you.
that. Look, I haven't even done any of the singles, the EPs. I'm just doing the albums. I
Okay.
think
Good.
just doing all of the albums right up to now, that's quite a big project on its own. I know that
Oh,
there's a
that's good.
bewildering array. I mean, he's got publishing rights to, isn't it something like 2,500 songs or something mad like that?
Yeah, that
Um,
sounds right.
yeah, but no, I know all about all the side projects, and then of course there's the solo projects of people who've been in
Mhm.
GBV and all the rest of it. No, I haven't touched that. I hopefully at some point. I mean, I may be in my 80s by the time I get to it, but we'll get to that at some point. But no, just the albums. I'm afraid I've been rather predictable. I've been marking them and giving them, keeping them in the league table as I go. And I have been quite boring and got Alien Lanes and B1000 at the top. But so
Yeah, it's
far,
hard. It's hard not to.
there's other albums I love, but yeah, I don't think you can top those two. I think they're absolutely brilliant. Anyway, sorry, I've digressed quite a bit.
No,
But
no, I love it.
yeah.
I love it all. I love it all. Do you have any favorite? You do hit on it, not as much as the music and the lyrics, of course, in the book, but do you have any favorite album artwork of the fall?
Yes, in fact, I did this. That's on the Falling Fires blog as well. I actually ranked and I put Grotesque at the top
Yeah.
because
Why
it
do you
is.
like grotesque?
Well, because it's grotesque.
Yeah.
There's something. Oh God, I can't remember what I wrote about it, but I mean, it is fascinating. It's one of the first albums I bought. So once I got into This Nation, Saving Grace, whatever, I went back and bought some old ones. I think that was probably the first one I bought, and I remember looking at the cover for a long, long time.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting one. I don't know. It's garish. It's psychedelic.
Mm.
It's just so very Fall. It is there's lots of Fall like. I mean, there's some terrible ones. I mean, Friends Experiment is an
Oh my
awful
God.
album
Yeah.
cover. Terrible cover.
It's terrible.
Cerebral Caustic is a terrible album cover. There are some real shockers along the way. But there is nothing more Fall-like than the cover of Grotesque. I just think it's absolutely fabulous. I'm trying to think which other ones I liked. Your Future Our Clutter is a fantastic album.
Yeah.
Terrible
Yeah.
cover. Terrible
Yeah.
cover.
Yeah.
What were they thinking? So yeah,
Even
they're up in
there's
there.
what Reformation Post TLC is kind of like. I mean, I like the mosaic design one, but there's one after that, or remit maybe. There's just an era of bad band photos where you're just like,
Well, there's Light User Syndrome has a band picture on the front.
yeah,
Where Smith, by his own admission in Renegade, actually is not well. I think
does
he
not
said
look good.
I
No.
said I think he said I had whiskey breath and I hadn't been eating my greens.
That looks right.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly. There's also have you seen the US cover of Reformation with the band shot on there?
It's almost like a candid photo. I don't
And
know, a high
and
school photo. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which has actually got Safi Sniper in there
Yeah.
as well. Interestingly, I don't know why he got roped in to be on the cover. Yeah, that's pretty terrible. Yeah, I quite like the cover of Remit because it's sort of entertainingly bad.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it's got
and
something to it, right?
and as you've probably heard, if you've heard me on anything else, and I'm constantly doing this both in print and I'm a constant defender of Remit, which I think is a great record,
Yeah, I love that
and
one.
shockingly frequently appears in the bottom one or two or three of people's ranking lists. I don't understand it. It's the album, particularly later bit album, where I think the Fall sound like they're having the most fun, and I think it's
Yeah.
infectious, and I think it's full of great songs. And I never miss an opportunity to say Remit is vastly underrated, and everyone always tells me that I'm wrong. But there you go.
Well, see, I'm with you, and also reading your book, I think I'm very like-minded. And I got to tell you, I haven't finished reading your book because I save the song portion for after we do our episodes
Okay.
as a little treat for myself to get, and I'm always surprised that we do have a similar to because that period that you're talking about around that remit period, I very much assimilate with those sounds because that's when I first got into the fall myself. So that all just kind of lines up there as well. But yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, and that's a lot of people say there's a bit of a cliche thing. People often say everyone's favorite Fall album is the first Fall album they heard
Yeah.
because it's the thing that turns them on. Now that's not actually true with me because I
That's
am an
yeah.
R with this. I think This Nation Saving Grace is probably my favorite. I mean, it's hard to argue against Hex, but I think Hex maybe loses its way a little bit in the second half.
Yeah.
A little bit. It's hard to argue. And it was, I suppose, This Nation Saving Grace was the first one I bought and owned and had. There's not much to I mean, yeah, it's hard, isn't it?
It's so hard. It's so hard. It's so
I
hard. I could
have
say
though. I
any
have
one
now
of those for
finally
sure.
come down to what my favorite Fall song is.
Oh, tell me.
Well, because we did this thing called the Fall Cup, so we had five of
Oh,
us did
yes.
it. Yeah, so Buzz Fidget who did the
Mhm.
annotated Fall, long-standing Fall member Eric who lives in Arizona now. Basically there were five of us did it, and we had a complex system with voting and group stages and all the rest of it. And when we got towards the end, Dr. Buck's letter was in there. And I always used to say to people, look, I don't know what my favorite Fall song is. Ask me what my favorite 10 are any given day. You'll get a different 10. But the
Mhm.
ones that are always in there is Paintwork is always in there. New Puritan, the Peel version, is always there. And Dr.
Mhm.
Buck's letter is always there. And as the time went through, and Dr. Buck had the final, and we went round and round. I plumped on the fact that I'm going to stick with it. That my favourite Fall song is Dr. Buck's letter. I think because I love the construction of it. I
Mhm.
love the melding of the guitar and the electronica, which I think that album was particularly good at. And it makes me laugh. Like most Fall songs, I've listened to it 200, 300 times, and the Pete Tong bit on the end consistently makes me smile. I was in the realm. The way he says CDs It's absolutely fabulous. So yeah, I'm going to stick my neck out and say that is.
I love it. I love it. What do you have any favorite band members that were in the group that kind of you think that
Well,
added a
I
sound?
think somebody who never gets the credit that she deserves is Elaine, because I
Yeah.
think she made a huge contribution to quite a big chunk of the Fall's career.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, she's no virtuoso keyboard player, certainly not.
Yeah.
She's not the world's greatest vocalist, but she added a sound and a dimension. And I also think that she kept the band going in the way
Yeah.
that Steve Hanley used to do once upon a time. She physically kept it going. I think it was her dealing with often with promoters and hotels and all that sort of stuff. I think she kept it going. And what really irks me, and this I get on my soapbox about this quite a lot, and I'm going to get all them politically correct and all the rest of it, or whatever we're supposed to call it, or woke, I suppose you're supposed to call it these days. What really irritates me is people put pictures of Mark Elaney or Mark and Delaney on there, and you'll get no more than 2 or 3 comments in, and somebody will say, "Oh, what a looker she was." How did he pull such a fabulous looking wife? God, wasn't Elaney hot? And nobody comments on Steve Hanley's appearance or Dave Bush's appearance. Why? So that really irks me. She made a really important musical contribution to the Fall and a contribution for. And I mean, I'm not. She is a very attractive woman, but that's neither here nor there.
Right,
And,
exactly.
a lot of it sort of tips over into sexism for me. So anyway,
Yeah.
soapbox over, and I don't suppose you have many right wing listeners who will probably think.
I don't,
So
I have
I
not
don't.
come across it
No,
yet, but
no.
I have
I don't
not come
suppose
across.
you're going to get many people calling me a woke snowflake or anything like this. But yeah,
No,
no, nothing across
I
like that.
actually think we got rid of a bunch of those listeners after they listened to the first couple episodes. They're like, I don't think this is for me."
No.
We got some comments and we're like, "I don't know if this is for you, mate." Like we just said, move forward." But I'm with you with her because I love it too because that's that end of the fall sound with that bass heavy keyboard octave down sound with juxtaposed to how the fall started, which was, Una and Yvonne playing kind of a similar style fall
Yeah.
sound keyboard. I just love it
It
as
makes
a
it nicely
vocalist.
circular, I think, as well. Yeah.
Totally,
And
totally.
it's always been true that there was a brief period in the 90s, was it, where there was a male only liner, but there's always been
Yes.
women fall and play an important part of the fall, and and they were never just there as eye candy or anything like that. They
No.
made important contributions. Um, Even I think, funny enough, I heard you mention a name. This is going to sound odd to you. I know it sounded odd to some other American friends, but I think it's Marcia. I know it's always
Marcy.
Marcia
Okay.
over there, but in this
Yeah.
country we tend to say Marcia for that.
Yes.
Um, and
Okay.
I only know that because Eric, who I mentioned before, who was on the Fall Cup with me, his wife is called Marcia,
Okay.
and it had never occurred to me till he heard somebody on a podcast when we say Marcia that's what she was called. So there
Yeah.
you go.
And
There's a little nugget
even
of knowledge for you.
we had trouble too. No, I like that and I appreciate that because we also were having trouble with Castle Webb, and we weren't sure if we were pronouncing that correct, Castle or Castle, but we
Cassell, I think, or does she not get
Castle,
Cassie? I think
yeah,
she Cassie as well. I don't know is the honest answer to that one. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say it out loud.
we usually don't know about a majority of the things we're pronouncing. So, but when it comes to Mark, especially, but we do appreciate that. We do appreciate that. And Steve, thanks for coming on the show and spending some time with us. It has been such a great time. But I'm really wondering if you have any future fall plans on the horizon.
Well, I don't know that I've got many fall plans, other than Steve and Paul are doing a live broadcast of their podcast in a couple of weeks up in Manchester, which
I
I'm
saw
driving
that.
up to
That sounds cool.
to say yes. I'm going up and staying with a friend up there and going to that. No, I don't think there is any more really to be written about the fall. I mean, somebody may well have a go. I mean, a book by trying to think if there's any good ex-members. I don't think the last lineup. I think I once jokingly suggest this to Pete Green or one of the others, and I don't think the last lineup there's going to be any books from them. I can't really think of anybody else who hasn't already done a book that would do a book.
Right.
We've had, obviously, as well as my book, you've got there's a recent one, there's a set of proper
Mhm.
academic essays about Smith, which I must confess I haven't read. They make my head hurt, those things. These people are all very, very clever, and I'm sure what they're coming up with is all very creative and analytical, but it's the style it's written in. I'm not an academic,
I'm with you. Yeah.
it makes my head hurt. I don't know what other angle you'd take, really. The only other thing is if the annotated fall could ever be made into a book, but that's the annotated fall depends a lot on the commentary from other people.
The interactive,
and I've used a tiny bit of it in my book when there's so much more, but I'm not sure how easy that would be to convert into a book form. So no, my wife's always on me. So are you going to write another book? And I'd love to write another book. I haven't found either an angle on an established artist who people have heard of, or an artist that nobody's written a book about that would be enough of a market for, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
So.
Absolutely.
Guided by Voices is already 2 or 3 books out there, I think. Nobody's done the record by record thing, I don't think. Like, have they?
No, but I've seen a couple kind of YouTubers that are doing that, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure how.
But I have a lot of work to do because the Guided by Voices blog I've done it in a really objective, context-free way. So I'm not even looking at the lineup or everything. I know the album, I know the date, and I review the songs as they are. So I'm doing a sort of
fun.
I'm trying to think. What's that literary movement where they F.R. Leavis, wasn't it? And they I can't remember what it is, a something-ism, where they said you should judge all literature without any context, about the artist or their life or something like that. So it's a bit like that is what I'm trying to do. So if I then went back and tried to write a book about Guided by Voices, I would have a huge amount of work to do. Sure. Because I don't, apart from the fact that from Dayton, Ohio, I don't really know any of the backstory whatsoever. But I think I've probably written all I'm going to write about the fall. I think that I've probably said all I'm going to say, really, apart from popping up on podcasts and the Facebook page to say Remit is underrated.
As you should. Well, love it, and thanks again, Steve, for stopping by, and thanks again for the book.
Is it cheeky though? I do have a new podcast coming out. Is it cheeky to ask to do a quick plug?
No, yeah, come on.
So I'm doing. It's called Steve's Mixtapes, and basically what I'm doing is it's inviting people to do a 10-song mix with 9 categories I've given them. So something old, something new, something brought. So there's like a description, got to fit criteria, and then there's one wild card song that you can slot in wherever. So the first full episode went out last Sunday. With just me doing one. And then in a couple of weeks' time, there'll be another one with Ian Forth from the Sombrero Fallout podcast. I did an interview with him. He talks through his choices. So there's a website, stevemixtapes.com. It's got all the links to all the podcast providers, and it's on SoundCloud and YouTube as well. So thank you for the opportunity to give a quick plug to that.
No, that's great.
And if you would ever like to do a mix, then give me a shout, totally. And we'll set up a meeting, and it's to sit and have a chat like this and tell me about it, and I edit it into
that sounds
podcast.
Great. I would love to sit down again with you, Steve, and talk some non-fall music, but I'm sure maybe there might be a fall track in there for me. But yeah, thanks again, Steve.
Great, nice talking to you.
Yeah, cheers.
Okay, cheers then.